Mary, I know you don't know exactly what's going to happen with tariffs, but two questions here. One, have you had a conversation with President Trump since he's taken office? And two, if tariffs are put in place to increase what is paid for a vehicle built in Mexico or built in Canada and brought here to the U.S., how much of that would you be able to pass along to the customer, or how much would you have to eat?
It took 100 years to build Detroit into a global powerhouse. Its fall, however, is happening before our eyes. When Mary Barra stepped forward in May 2025, she confirmed what the numbers had already made clear: $5 billion in losses, $3 billion erased from future guidance, and 400,000 vehicles rendered worthless by a tariff wall too steep to scale. But these aren't just statistics. They're the vital signs of a dying industrial ecosystem. Car prices are about to explode. Manufacturing jobs are evaporating faster than politicians can make excuses. The automotive supply chain that employed millions is disintegrating in real time. How many days before your local dealer raises prices? Stick around. Time is running out to understand the forces reshaping your economic reality. Every day you wait, the damage accelerates. The financial fortress crumbles. Your retirement portfolio felt the tremor immediately. General Motors shares tumbled as investors processed the magnitude of tariff exposure hitting America's largest automaker. The company that posted nearly $12 billion in net income during 2024 suddenly faced cost increases that would devour almost half of its annual profits. Chief Financial Officer Paul Jacobson attempted to project confidence during emergency investor calls, outlining plans to mitigate 30% of the increased costs through internal initiatives. The remaining 70% would hammer earnings, forcing the company to suspend share buyback programs. Employees who received record profit-sharing payments of $14,500 in 2024 watched nervously as the financial foundation supporting those bonuses eroded. The arithmetic was merciless. Every imported vehicle now carried an additional 25% cost burden, while domestic production faced tariffs on critical components, ranging from steel and aluminum to sophisticated electronics. General Motors found itself trapped between impossible choices: absorb billions in additional costs, raise prices in an already strained consumer market, or fundamentally reorganize decades of carefully optimized manufacturing networks. Investment firms that had rated General Motors as a stable dividend play suddenly confronted a company whose core business model faced existential pressure. The automotive sector, once considered a relatively predictable investment category, became a speculative bet on trade policy outcomes. The arithmetic was merciless, but the human cost would prove even more devastating than anyone imagined. Supply chain domino effect. How does an industry giant fall? One supplier at a time. The integrated manufacturing network that made modern vehicles possible became a vulnerability when borders transformed into economic barriers. Components that once flowed seamlessly between Mexico, Canada, and the United States now faced bureaucratic checkpoints and financial penalties at every crossing. Tier 1 suppliers, the large companies providing major systems like engines and transmissions directly to General Motors, possessed sufficient scale to weather initial tariff impacts. Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers faced a different reality entirely. Small manufacturers in Pennsylvania and Ohio that provided specialized components lacked the financial cushion to absorb sudden cost increases. A family-owned machine shop in Toledo that manufactured precision parts for transmission systems couldn't simply relocate to Mexico or absorb 25% cost increases on raw materials. These smaller companies faced immediate pressure to raise prices, potentially losing contracts to international competitors, or accept unsustainable margins that would force closure within months. General Motors' supplier network extended far beyond automotive manufacturing. Tool and die makers, specialized metalworking shops, electronics manufacturers, and logistics companies had built their entire business models around serving the automotive industry. The ripple effect of tariff costs threatened to eliminate not just individual companies but entire industrial clusters that had taken generations to develop. Supply chain nationalism sounded appealing in political rhetoric, But the reality of dismantling global manufacturing networks created immediate practical problems. Modern vehicles contained thousands of components sourced from dozens of countries, each optimized for specific manufacturing capabilities and cost structures. Meanwhile, on factory floors across the Midwest, workers were beginning to understand the true cost of the trade war. The worker awakening. The middle class wasn't just squeezed, it was targeted. When General Motors announced the elimination of production shifts at its Oshawa, Ontario facility, over 2,000 workers received notice that their careers in automotive manufacturing faced an uncertain future. The plant that had operated continuously providing stable middle-class employment to multiple generations became the first visible casualty of tariff policies designed to protect American jobs. United Auto Workers Union representatives arrived at General Motors facilities across the Midwest to find workforce anxiety reaching levels not seen since the financial crisis of 2008. Workers who had negotiated record profit-sharing agreements just months earlier now faced the possibility that those agreements meant nothing if the company couldn't maintain profitability under tariff pressure. Automotive manufacturing had provided a pathway to middle-class prosperity for millions of American families. Workers without college degrees could earn wages sufficient to purchase homes, support families, and build retirement savings through stable employment at companies like General Motors. The tariff crisis threatened to eliminate this pathway, forcing career transitions that many workers in their 40s and 50s were unprepared to navigate. Family dynamics shifted as economic uncertainty invaded previously stable households. Spouses who had planned career breaks to raise children faced pressure to seek employment. College savings accounts earmarked for children's education became emergency funds to weather potential unemployment. Retirement plans developed over decades of steady employment suddenly seemed unrealistic. The cultural impact extended beyond economics. Automotive manufacturing communities had built their identities around the pride of producing vehicles that traveled the world. Company logos on factory gates represented not just employment, but community status and regional economic vitality. What came next would test every political alliance and force a reckoning with decades of trade policy assumptions that had shaped the global economy. We connected dots between corporate boardrooms, Washington policy rooms, and your family budget that no one else is talking about. You just got the full picture of how trade wars actually work in the real world, not just political talking points. If this kind of complete analysis helps you make better decisions, subscribe for more. Political firestorm. What if the biggest threat wasn't foreign competition, but domestic betrayal? Congressional hearing rooms erupted with bipartisan fury as lawmakers from both parties demanded explanations for tariff policies that were systematically dismantling American automotive manufacturing. Republicans and Democrats found common ground in their criticism of trade policies that had backfired spectacularly. Michigan's unemployment rate climbed to 5.5%. Nearly 2 percentage points above the national average of 4.2%. The state that had delivered crucial electoral votes to President Trump watched its economic foundation crumble under policies designed to strengthen American manufacturing. Congressional representatives from automotive districts faced impossible political calculations: support the administration's trade agenda or defend their constituents' livelihoods. Emergency sessions convened in Washington as lawmakers scrambled to propose remedial legislation. Tax relief packages for domestic producers gained bipartisan support, while others urged immediate recalibration of trade policy toward multilateral agreements rather than unilateral tariff impositions. Industry lobbying reached fever pitch as automotive executives descended on Capitol Hill with detailed presentations about supply chain vulnerabilities. The Trump administration found itself trapped between conflicting pressures. Retreating from tariff policies would signal weakness and policy failure, but maintaining them threatened permanent damage to a cornerstone American industry. The disconnect between policy rhetoric about protecting American jobs and the reality of job losses created cognitive dissonance that would reshape political messaging. Across state lines, other manufacturers were making calculations that would determine the industry's future. The competitor's gambit. In just 24 hours, everything changed. Ford Motor Company suspended its annual guidance, warning investors that tariffs would cost the company approximately $1.5 billion in adjusted earnings before interest and taxes. The second largest American automaker joined General Motors in demonstrating that protectionist policies were systematically undermining domestic automotive competitiveness. Stellantis temporarily shuttered production at multiple facilities, as tariff costs made continued operation economically unsustainable. The company's diverse international portfolio provided options that purely American manufacturers lacked, highlighting competitive disadvantages created by trade policy. Japanese automakers Toyota and Honda discovered unexpected advantages in their decades-old strategy of building substantial domestic manufacturing capacity within the United States. Their American-built vehicles faced no import tariffs, while their established supplier networks had deeper domestic content than American competitors, who had optimized for cross-border manufacturing efficiency. Market dynamics shifted rapidly as consumer behavior responded to impending price increases. Automotive inventory levels plummeted from 2.99 million units to 2.66 million units as buyers accelerated purchasing decisions to avoid tariff-induced price increases. April sales surged 20% compared to the previous year, creating artificial demand that masked underlying economic vulnerabilities. The competitive landscape transformation favored manufacturers with higher percentages of domestic production, creating perverse incentives that rewarded less efficient production strategies. Investment analysts scrambled to recalibrate automotive sector recommendations as fundamental competitive advantages shifted overnight. Foreign manufacturers with substantial American operations positioned themselves as beneficiaries of policy changes that disadvantaged their American competitors. The irony was impossible to ignore. Foreign companies were becoming the primary defenders of American automotive jobs, while American companies faced pressure to reduce domestic employment. The numbers revealed something no one expected. The policy designed to help American automakers was systematically destroying their competitive position. Community collapse. This wasn't just about cars anymore. It was about survival. Rust Belt communities that had built their entire economic foundations around automotive manufacturing watched decades of development dissolve as plant closures eliminated the industrial base that supported local economies. Local businesses faced immediate impact as automotive workers reduced spending. The diner frequented by plant workers during shift changes saw customer traffic drop 30% within weeks of layoff announcements. Hardware stores that specialized in industrial equipment watched sales evaporate as maintenance budgets disappeared along with production schedules. Property values in automotive-dependent communities began declining as families faced uncertain employment futures. Young families who had purchased homes near automotive facilities found themselves trapped with underwater mortgages in communities with shrinking economic prospects. School districts dependent on tax revenue from automotive wages confronted budget crises that threatened educational quality. Municipalities that had invested in infrastructure improvements to support manufacturing operations faced the prospect of servicing debt without the tax base that had justified those investments. The multiplier effect economists had warned about became visible in community after community. Every job lost at General Motors eliminated approximately 3 additional positions in supporting industries, from logistics and transportation to retail and professional services. The specialized ecosystem that supported automotive manufacturing began fragmenting as each component lost viability. Emergency social services expanded to address the mental health impacts of sudden unemployment and economic uncertainty. The social fabric of manufacturing communities underwent stress testing as residents questioned fundamental assumptions about economic stability and career planning. Deep within global supply chains, other countries were positioning themselves to capture the manufacturing capacity fleeing American shores. International retaliation. When does innovation become destruction? The European Union accelerated discussions about reciprocal automotive tariffs, viewing American trade policy as an attack on established international agreements that had governed global commerce. European officials watched their careful diplomatic work unravel as economic nationalism replaced multilateral cooperation. Canada and Mexico, partners in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, found themselves reconsidering fundamental assumptions about North American economic integration. The trade framework that had created seamless automotive supply chains suddenly became a liability as borders transformed from logistical conveniences into economic barriers. Asian manufacturing countries began forming alternative trade alliances designed to bypass American markets and reduce dependence on United States economic policies. Supply chain reconfiguration accelerated as manufacturers sought stable regulatory environments that wouldn't subject their operations to sudden policy reversals. Foreign direct investment patterns shifted as international corporations reassessed the reliability of American trade policy. Countries that had viewed the United States as a stable destination for manufacturing investment began questioning whether regulatory predictability could be maintained across electoral cycles. Global automotive competitiveness calculations changed as American manufacturers lost access to cost-efficient international supply chains, while foreign competitors maintained integrated production networks. International diplomatic relationships strained as trade policy became a tool of unilateral pressure rather than multilateral negotiation. The automotive industry's global integration had created interdependencies that couldn't be easily severed without causing systemic disruption. American attempts to reshape trade relationships through tariff pressure threatened to isolate the United States from manufacturing networks that had made modern automotive production economically viable. Now the entire industry hung in the balance as the consequences of economic nationalism spread beyond American borders to reshape global manufacturing and trade relationships. The unintended revolution. The consequences would ripple across continents as the true scale of economic disruption became clear. A comprehensive study by the Center for Automotive Research revealed that President Trump's 25% auto tariffs would increase costs by approximately $108 billion for automakers in the United States during 2025 alone. The Detroit Three, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis faced a combined impact of $42 billion. Tariffs added approximately $5,000 in costs for parts imported on average for each car produced in the United States, while imported vehicles faced an additional $8,600 in tariff expenses. These weren't abstract policy discussions. They represented fundamental changes to the economics of automotive manufacturing that had evolved over decades of optimization. Production forecasts reflected the severity of impact as analysts projected cuts of 944,000 units in North American manufacturing capacity during 2025. The steepest reductions since the pandemic represented not temporary adjustments, but structural changes to industrial capacity that would reshape the continental automotive landscape permanently. Industry-wide guidance suspensions became the norm as major manufacturers abandoned financial forecasting in the face of policy uncertainty. Companies that had provided reliable earnings projections to investors found themselves unable to predict basic operational costs, as trade policy became the primary variable determining profitability. The scale of economic transformation exceeded even pessimistic projections, as tariff policies designed to strengthen domestic manufacturing systematically undermined the competitive position of American automotive companies relative to their international competitors. Behind closed doors, corporate survival strategies were reshaping the industry's fundamental structure. Corporate survival strategies. Your next car purchase just became a political statement. General Motors embarked on unprecedented internal restructuring as the company developed what executives privately called policy proof. Supply chain strategies designed to minimize exposure to future trade disruptions. The concept represented a fundamental shift from efficiency-based optimization to resilience-focused operations that could weather political volatility. Supplier relationship renegotiations accelerated as General Motors pressured parts manufacturers to increase domestic content percentages to comply with United States-Mexico-Canada agreement requirements. Chief Financial Officer Paul Jacobson announced plans to mitigate 30% of tariff costs through these internal initiatives, though the remaining 70% would continue pressuring profitability. Production shifting became a survival mechanism as General Motors increased truck output at its Fort Wayne, Indiana assembly plant, while reducing operations at facilities dependent on cross-border supply chains. The company that had spent decades optimizing global manufacturing networks found itself rebuilding domestic capacity at significantly higher costs to avoid tariff exposure. Automation acceleration emerged as a strategy to reduce labor dependency and increase domestic production viability. Investments in robotics and artificial intelligence that had been planned as gradual efficiency improvements became urgent necessities to maintain competitiveness under tariff pressure. Electric vehicle transition timelines compressed as companies sought to differentiate their products and justify higher prices required by increased production costs. General Motors announced plans to increase production of United States-made battery modules as a low-cost way to increase domestic content, while working with suppliers to achieve higher levels of compliance with trade agreement requirements. Corporate risk management departments scrambled to integrate geopolitical stress testing into long-term planning models. What happened next would alter the global economy forever as consumer behavior adapted to the new reality: the consumer squeeze. Every family budget became a casualty of the trade war. Vehicle price increase projections varied by manufacturer and model, but industry analysts predicted average increases of several $1,000s across popular vehicle categories as importers passed tariff costs to consumers. American families already struggling with inflation faced additional financial pressure on one of their largest purchases. Consumer purchasing decisions accelerated dramatically as buyers rushed to complete vehicle purchases before tariff-induced price increases took effect. Dealership inventories that had maintained healthy levels throughout early 2025 suddenly faced depletion as artificial demand, created by policy uncertainty, overwhelmed normal market dynamics. Used car markets experienced secondary effects as new vehicle price increases pushed marginal buyers toward pre-owned alternatives. Vehicles that had been trading at predictable depreciation rates suddenly gained value as tariffs made new alternatives more expensive. The ripple effect extended beyond automotive markets to affect household financial planning and major purchase timing. Financing challenges emerged as higher vehicle prices stretched household budgets and required larger loan amounts for equivalent transportation. Families that had planned vehicle replacements based on traditional pricing found themselves reconsidering purchase timelines or accepting less desirable alternatives to manage affordability constraints. Regional availability shortages developed as manufacturers prioritized high-margin vehicles for markets willing to absorb tariff costs, while reducing shipments to price-sensitive areas. Rural communities that depended on affordable transportation options faced particular challenges as entry-level vehicle availability declined. Brand loyalty patterns shifted as pricing became the dominant factor in purchase decisions. Consumers who had maintained preferences for specific manufacturers found themselves comparing alternatives based primarily on tariff exposure and resulting price differences rather than traditional factors like reliability and features. Meanwhile, in corporate boardrooms worldwide, a new industrial order was taking shape: global industry reshuffling. The middle-class dream wasn't just under attack. It was being redistributed across international boundaries as manufacturing capacity flowed toward countries offering stable regulatory environments and integrated supply chains. International automotive investment flows reversed decades-old patterns, as companies sought alternatives to politically volatile American production networks. Emerging market production capacity expansion accelerated as manufacturers diverted investments planned for North American facilities toward locations offering greater policy predictability. Countries in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America positioned themselves as beneficiaries of American trade policy disruption by offering comprehensive incentive packages to attract displaced manufacturing capacity. Technology transfer acceleration occurred as American automotive companies established research and development facilities in countries where they planned to concentrate production activities. The intellectual capital that had driven American automotive innovation began dispersing internationally as companies adapted to trade policy constraints. Global talent migration patterns shifted as skilled automotive professionals followed manufacturing opportunities to international locations, offering career stability. Engineers, designers, and manufacturing specialists who had built careers in American automotive hubs faced decisions about relocating internationally or transitioning to different industries entirely. The European Union intensified efforts to finalize comprehensive trade agreements with emerging markets, positioning itself as a stable alternative to American policy volatility. Asian countries advanced regional economic integration initiatives that explicitly excluded American participation, while offering attractive alternatives for displaced manufacturing investment. American automotive leadership erosion became measurable as market share statistics and production capacity data reflected the systematic competitive disadvantages created by trade policy. The country that had invented modern automotive manufacturing watched its global influence diminish as policy decisions prioritized short-term political considerations over long-term economic competitiveness. The transformation could not be undone. Now it is time to decide whether the future of the American automotive industry would be marked by adaptation or extinction. Adaptation or extinction. The collapse of General Motors' traditional U.S. operations triggered a complete redefinition of its corporate structure. Gone was the centralized, Detroit-dominated model. In its place, a decentralized system took hold, empowering regional chief executive officers with broad autonomy over product design, marketing, and supply chains. This decentralization reflected a harsh new global reality shaped by fragmented trade environments and relentless tariffs. To survive, General Motors invested in cross-cultural leadership training and high-tech collaboration platforms. Executives were now expected to navigate diverse regulatory environments across continents, supported by real-time translation and virtual conferencing systems that bridged global time zones. Built in America was replaced by a message of global collaboration. Vehicles produced in Hungary or Brazil now carried the same badge as those from Michigan, despite wildly different production conditions. Standardized quality systems ensured consistency, but the economics were no longer American. Marketing evolved, spotlighting local apprenticeships in Mexico and environmental programs in South Africa. Internally, General Motors restructured its culture into a globally integrated, brand-consistent, yet locally adapted network. What had once been a U.S.-based manufacturer was now a borderless industrial organism. The technology acceleration. Trade war disruptions forced General Motors into survival mode, pushing innovation to the forefront. Electric vehicle development timelines were slashed as new global hubs sprang up in countries with clean energy advantages and favorable trade terms. Greenfield factories adopted digital twin modeling, robotics, and smart automation from day one. Battery production became a priority. General Motors raced to secure lithium and cobalt through mining partnerships and processing investments, reducing dependence on politically volatile sources. Tariffs made these resources as strategically important as oil once was. Sustainability wasn't optional, it became a necessity. Battery recycling plants were constructed next to vehicle factories to recover valuable metals. Steelmakers re-engineered processes to include more recycled input. These changes cut costs and protected against future trade shocks. Artificial intelligence became critical. From predictive maintenance to real-time supply chain adjustments, manufacturing evolved into a hyper-digitized process. And in a world where hardware was tariff-prone, software became gold. General Motors doubled down on software-defined vehicles, intellectual property that could cross borders freely. This pivot to tech didn't just protect profits. It reshaped how vehicles were made, sold, and evolved globally. The workforce transformation. America's auto workforce faced an industrial upheaval not seen since the invention of the assembly line. Entire career paths vanished as internal combustion engines gave way to battery packs and circuit boards. General Motors launched retraining initiatives, but not everyone could transition. Community colleges revamped programs to teach electric powertrains, software diagnostics, and robotics. The value of a 20-year veteran on a traditional engine line suddenly plummeted, while demand soared for automation technicians and battery specialists. To protect knowledge, companies archived retiring workers' expertise through mentorship programs and digital libraries. Yet the most painful change came with geography. Jobs moved. Factories closed in legacy towns, while new ones opened in trade-friendly zones or abroad. Families rooted in Michigan and Ohio had to choose: follow the job or stay behind. New jobs didn't always pay the same or come with the same protections. Mental health crises emerged as workers struggled to find new purpose and financial stability. For many, this was not just a career disruption, it was a cultural identity crisis. Skill sets now had to include technological fluency, adaptability, and willingness to relocate. The promise of generational prosperity through auto work had been rewritten, and not everyone would make the leap. The reckoning. Was it worth it? That question defined the national conversation as the consequences of tariffs rippled across the economy. Supporters pointed to domestic battery plants and short-term job growth. Critics highlighted long-term market losses and manufacturing flight. General Motors lost significant ground to European and Asian rivals in markets it once dominated. American cars grew more expensive due to reshoring and duplication of supply chains, while competitors gained market share by producing efficiently under stable trade deals. Net job loss remained high. For every 1,000 jobs created by domestic assembly initiatives, thousands more vanished from supply chains, component manufacturing, and support industries. The reshuffling weakened the once tight-knit, efficient global auto ecosystem. The industry itself fractured. Supply chains shrank. Resilience overtook efficiency as the new gold standard. Companies abandoned just-in-time logistics in favor of in-house capabilities and geographically buffered supply networks. Debates raged between nationalists demanding more Made in America policies and economists warning of long-term decline if global competitiveness wasn't restored. General Motors became the poster child for both sides, celebrated by some, criticized by others. What comes next is uncertain. America may rebuild its manufacturing base around new tech and regional trade partnerships, or it may fall further behind as companies complete their migration overseas. But one thing is clear: the game has changed. The American auto industry stands at a crossroads. Survival will depend on adaptability, innovation, and the choices made by consumers, workers, and voters in the years ahead. Are we headed for a reset or a full collapse? What do you think? Join the conversation in the comments. Thanks.